Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are going to give a few minutes before we get started, but I wanted to just let everyone know as you're getting settled, this session is being recorded. It will be featured on Art New York's YouTube page in a few weeks, once this recording is edited and ready for distribution. Only the folks who are spotlighted, which will include our panelists as well as our interpreters, will be seen on the recording. So whether or not you have your camera on is optional, but do know that if you come on mic and speak, that will be in the recording. And so if you don't want to be on the recording, you're welcome to engage via the chat function. Captions are available for this session, and you can access those using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And again, we will have a conversation for about the first hour of our time together and hold some space for a question and answer session near the end. In that question and answer session, you are welcome to, again, ask your questions via the chat if you would prefer not to be on the recording, or you're welcome to use the raise hand feature, and we can call on you and spotlight you, and you can ask your question on camera and be part of the recording if that's what you would prefer. So when we get to the Q&A section later, you will have those options, either the raise hand feature or asking your question in the chat, whichever you would prefer. My colleague Nicky is here offering technical support. If you need anything, they have dropped something in the chat about the captions. So if you need additional technical support, you're welcome to private chat Nicky. Nicky, I would ask if you also, when you have a moment, could remind folks via the chat function that their options for, that this is being recorded and that their options for asking questions are either to ask them in the chat or to use the raise hand feature so that we can call on them and include them in the recording if that's what they would prefer. Again, we won't get to the Q&A section until later, so there's plenty of time, but I just want to make sure that's included in the chat as well. All right, it looks like we are gathering, and there will be more joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. Welcome, everyone, to Art New York's panel about the ins and outs of touring. My name is David Shane. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the Senior Manager of Programs here at Art New York. I am a white man in my 30s with brown, somewhat spiky hair and a short brown beard. Today I'm wearing a purple sweater and a white collared shirt. And I'm sitting in a space with some windows to my right, some lovely sunlight coming in through those windows, and some white walls behind me. I am actually recording this today from the lobby of the Art New York theaters. As you know, for those of you who signed up for this panel, today's panel is being recorded. So hello to everyone who's watching the recording after the fact. For those of you here in the room, you will not be featured on the recording unless you are spotlighted. And so if you would like to ask a question on camera, you can use the raise hand feature and we'll spotlight you so that you can ask your question live to the panelists. If you would prefer not to be a part of the recording, you're welcome to ask your question via the chat and we'll read it out for our panelists so that they can respond to your questions then. We're going to start with introductions and then about 50 minutes or so of a moderated discussion, and then we'll hold space at the end for about 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A from the group. If you have questions that come up as we're going through and you want to drop those questions in the chat, you're welcome to, just in case you want to make sure you don't forget. But we probably will hold most of those questions for the Q&A portion at the end. Before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, I'm going to take just a moment to offer up a land acknowledgement, and I invite you to join me in acknowledging that wherever we are located on Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America, we are on occupied territory. Art New York's membership in the 5 boroughs of New York City operates on the unceded ancestral land of the Lenape, Wappinger, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Matinecock communities. I want to honor and celebrate all of these Indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. I also want to take this time to acknowledge that after there was stolen land, there were stolen people. I want to honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. And since we are gathered today in virtual space, let's also take a moment to consider the legacies of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, anti-racism, and allyship. Thank you for taking that moment with me. Thank you also to Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada, who is the author of the second half of Acknowledgment, specifically around virtual space. Nicky is dropping into the chat some links so you can learn more about the land that you may be occupying, and also a link to our friends at TCG for some resources about some Native-led justice movements that you might want to look into supporting. So thank you for taking that moment with me. Okay, I am going to turn it over to our illustrious panelists and ask them to introduce themselves. And so I'm just going to go in the order that I'm seeing them on my screen. So first up, I will invite Deidra to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hi, folks. My name is Deidra Harrington, she, her, hers. I am one of the producing artistic leaders at the Movement Theater Company. I am a light-skinned Black woman with a short brown afro, and I am wearing a light pink sweatshirt with some little pearls on it, as well as a black and white polka dotted collared shirt. I am in a tan room with a couple of light brown doors behind and to the side of me. And to give a little context, I'm coming into the space today to really talk about my experience at the movement and when touring happens to you, and what it's like being a small and mighty theater company partnering with larger institutions and regional houses.
Thank you. Michelle Preston.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Preston. I'm the executive director of City Company. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with short brown and blonde hair. I'm wearing a black scoop neck sweater, and I have my background blurred, but you can kind of tell I'm in an office. It's a little yellowish. The City Company is an ensemble theater company who tours both domestically and internationally. We're about 30 years old. And I come to this, we work with a booking agent. However, some of the relationships with presenters are stewarded by us. Largely, I don't go on tour, but sometimes I do. And I'm certainly the person that they all call at 3 a.m. when there's an emergency. So I can talk about a wide range of aspects of touring once you're to the level of doing it quite a bit, which is how we earn most of our revenue. We self-produce very rarely and tour quite a bit.
Thank you. Carlo. Carlo, you are muted.
Sorry about that. My name's Carlo Edenolpi. I'm the co-artistic director of Concrete Temple Theater. I'm a white man in my 60s, gray hair, red sweater, black reading glasses. On the wall behind me, there's old paintings from Italy, and there's a wolf rod puppet. My pronouns are he, him, his. The theater company, Concrete Temple Theater, is a multidisciplinary company. We tour internationally and nationally. And I guess we're very small, and I suppose I go on tour with all the shows. I perform in many of them. And we have most of what I can offer is how we get gigs and then how we turn those gigs into tours. Oh, my pronouns are he, him, his.
Thanks, Carlo. And Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Coe. She, her, hers are my pronouns. I work with Urban Bush Women. We are a contemporary dance company based in Brooklyn, been around for inching up toward 40 years. Very proud to be part of the organization. I've been here for about 4.5, almost 5 years, and I'm the director of touring and booking. I'm a white woman in my, we'll say, early middle ages. I have chin length hair, dyed burgundy brown. I'm wearing a floral top and a black jacket. Also sitting in front of a large 35mm film reel in front of a gray lavender wall. Let me think. Oh, my role here at Urban Bush Women is really to prospect and reach out to presenters. So it's sales, it's also negotiating contracts and fees and what happens. And then working closely with our artistic and production teams to advance the engagement. And I don't go on the road, but vicariously and also occasionally take calls at 3 a.m. Is that everything? I think I got everything.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to have all of you here. And as you know, we've shared in advance some questions for you to think about that I hope will guide a really interesting conversation. So let's start at the beginning. My first question for you as a group is, where do you go about finding touring opportunities? Where do you find venues or partners? Talk to me a little bit about the beginning of that process. And I'm going to ask Carlo to start us off, but everyone please be thinking about how you might want to respond to this question of how do you go about finding venues and partners at the start of planning a touring process.
Mic on. We've generally got our gigs by getting a gig in a festival and then building from that. That's been our sort of in. So I can give you a link. I mean, it's critical-stages.org, and they have, that's one of many potential places you can find lists of all the festivals in the world and then, apply. Now, the festivals don't pay much money. In fact, they often just pay you a small fee, and it's nothing like enough money to cover the cost of getting to the country. And what we've done is use the festival, but the people who run the festival are very not, they know everybody in the country, they're well connected. That's how they managed to be a festival organizer. They know people in other countries nearby. They're very connected. And what we've done is we've called the State Department, the embassy or the consulate, the nearest embassy or consulate, and just persistently kept calling and calling until we could talk to somebody at the State Department in that country. And it's actually paid off. Usually what's happened is they will then, if they're interested, they'll think about booking us regionally in that country, and they'll put together a tour and they'll pay for travel, they'll pay for shipping, they'll pay for accommodation. They don't pay us very much. They pay like $200 a day to each artist, which is very nominal, but everything's covered. They get us from A to B, they make sure everything runs really smoothly. And these people are total pros. I mean, and the amazing thing is they really want to serve underserved communities. They'll take us to, women's colleges. They'll take us to disabled communities where, it's like literally we went to work with puppeteers who were disabled. It was amazing. They'll, they specifically want to try and get us to be doing things at places where people wouldn't normally have seen these shows. So it's amazing that way. And there's a difference between the actual American representative there, who's the cultural attaché. They only are there for 2 years. And so the rotation is so fast that they barely know the job before they've left, or know the country before they've left. But there's a professional who's there and who's a local person, and that's their job to organize everything and sort of keep a continuity going. And those people are unbelievable. I mean, they book everything, blah, 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 and connect everything. So, we know that they keep a file on your company, and they refer to that file and they write reports. So make sure you've done your homework and you really know your cultural stuff about the country you're going into, and that it all pays off. Be good to work with, be easy to work with. So those are the main points I have. I can answer questions about that as things go.
Carlo, could you tell us a few of the countries that you have toured to?
We've been, we toured in India, and the State Department, we got one gig in a festival, and that ended up being a tour of all over India. And then they hooked us up to Sri Lanka. So that was incredible. Then we've gone to Costa Rica, that we didn't use the State Department there. Italy. And then even in Italy, we just invited the consulate, and they came, and that meant a big thing to our hosts, just to have them come, even though they didn't pay any money to us. It was just important. South Korea, and we're building on that to actually be able to tour regionally. We're actually training puppeteers in South Korea on the show right now, and trying to work in that region. Turkey, Bulgaria. We left the show, we left all the set in Turkey and then shipped it over to Bulgaria, and so.
Incredible, thank you. So we've heard about, in the international stage through state departments. Deidra, you were saying beforehand that your experience for touring, your coming to the touring is quite different. So I wonder if you would like to share, how does it come about for you and the Movement Theater Company?
Yeah, so for us, it really came, with our production of What to Send Up When It Goes Down by Alicia Harris, directed by Whitney White in 2018. And, we really worked to just invite as many folks to come to the show as possible, and then word kind of spread. So then folks were coming into town to see the piece. I think it was a bit of a serendipitous moment as well. It was right at the time where a lot of regional theaters were getting the sort of changing of the guard, these new artistic directors who were really looking to make a really strong statement with what they wanted to program on their stages. And so Maria Goyanes at Woolly Mammoth, she knew our work as a company from before and got really jazzed and really excited about it. And then folks from a bunch of other regional theaters came, folks from A.R.T. and also folks here in New York, Playwrights Horizons. And Maria really, championed us bringing What to Send Up to Woolly Mammoth, and then really looked at how can we financially make this tour happen. So then we started building relationships with the folks over at A.R.T., with the folks here in New York at the Public as well, to work together to finance the sort of the remounting and then the touring of the show. And so it was definitely a moment when the touring kind of happened to us, and then figuring out the details. And I shared this with the panel earlier. It's so serendipitous. When all of this started happening for us at the Movement, Michelle is one of the people that I reached out to be like, help, they're asking me for these numbers and I don't know what it's going to cost to move this stuff. Will we even have it by the time they figure out their tour? And so reaching out to colleagues who have a lot of experience is always key.
Then I'm going to follow your lead, and I'm going to reach out now to Michelle Preston and ask you, Michelle, to tell us a little bit about city companies, touring, how that comes about for you. And then also, if you want to speak a little bit to what Deidra is talking about here, the putting together of those numbers. Well, how does that start?
Absolutely. So, when City Company was a brand new company, they did everything that Carlos's company is doing, right? They went to a lot of festivals. They took nearly no money for anything. They got paid very little, but they were all about being on the road and getting the work out there. And at a certain point, the ensemble made the decision that they were not going to keep doing that they wanted to be paid a real living wage to be able to do that work. And so that meant they had to start saying no gigs or to start really aggressively negotiating. I've been with City Company since 2012, so it's really just maybe a third of their overall history of touring. And for us, like, we have a booking agent and they have their relationships, but City Company itself also has built a lot of relationships with university presenters over the course of 30 years. And so sometimes gigs are coming to us through the booking agent. Sometimes they're coming to us through those relationships. And sometimes it's a multi-year conversation. It is very much like donor stewardship is the same as presenter stewardship to me. So APAP is the big booking conference in New York City. I always go to APAC not as a registered like conference member, but I just schedule meetings with people and presenters and people we've had relationships with because they're going to be in New York. And so I'm like, hey, you want to have coffee? You want to have a drink? You want to have lunch? Sometimes Anne comes with me. Sometimes one of the other co-artistic directors comes with me. And my first question to them or comment is never like, here are the things on my roster to tour. It's, what are you doing? What are you programming for your season? What are you thinking about? What are you trying to get your audiences exposed to? And then they tell me what they're looking for. And then I have in the back of my head my roster of pieces or productions that we're touring or things that we want to build in the next couple of years and we're looking for commissioning partners for. And I sort of actively curate that list as I listen to them. And sometimes the answer is, I don't have anything for your audiences right now, or I don't have anything that you are going to be interested in right now, but let's keep talking. So I go into that meeting and I sort of have a round budget number, a fee for each one of those things on my target hit list. But one of the things that is really important is that your budget, like anything else, is kind of flexible. So, you know, it costs a lot more to fly to California and ship things to California from New York than it does to ship it to Ohio. And so while I start off with this is the standard weekly fee, or this is the standard schedule, once you get into a deep conversation with a presenter, I'm really working with our booking agent to customize those numbers for that tour as much as possible. So we can really get to a place where the presenter gets the amount of engagement and the amount of time that they want and they need from us, that we get an amount of money that allows us to pay for our costs and pay our artists and make sure that nobody is too stressed out or trying to do too many things in one day. And then, you know, building a fair amount of contingency to figure out what you don't know, because my staff likes to joke, I live in the future. I'm talking about things 2 or 3 years out. So when you're building a budget now for something that's going to happen in 3 years, you don't know what oil prices are going to be. You don't know what shipping costs are going to be. You don't really know what flights are going to be. So you're making a lot of educated guesses, signing on the dotted line for something maybe a year plus in advance, and then hoping that you've built enough contingency in that budget to have wiggle room to deal with whatever crisis happens. And there will always be a crisis, and the scale of the crisis will be different.
Thank you, Michelle. I will come back to crisis management shortly. Trust, believe. I want to go next to Michelle Coe and ask you, Michelle, how does it start for you and Urban Bushwomen?
So prospecting for me, when I first started with the organization, I did a lot of research just on Urban Bushwomen's extensive history and where we've been, and sort of made a concise list of, you know, where have we been and who can we go back to. Presenters like to allow a lot of breathing room between the last time an artist has been to their venue. Even like 2 seasons is sometimes too soon. So just kind of being aware of when we were last there, because that's often a question that I get of like, oh, when did we last have you? So kind of having that on the brain is super helpful. Also understanding the work, excuse me, because knowing what kind of venue we actually want to go to, if it's just sort of a, like we like to say, our lights and tights concert dance performance, or if it's maybe we're currently now doing a more site-specific work. Some of our other works are more dance theater, and they like to move around to different rooms in a venue. So I'm looking for venues who might look for something interesting and an unconventional experience for their audiences. It's kind of hard to tell, especially now if you go on presenter websites to do the research because of COVID. A lot of people haven't been doing a lot of typical season programming, but doing that research, not only kind of looking at where you've been, but where you would like to go, what cities you would like to go. Do you have an anchor date? Maybe one venue that's kind of excited about having you? Can you do a tour in the South, for example? So let me research different venues in the South. When it comes to dance, there probably aren't that many venues in America, unfortunately, anymore that really do present dance. If somebody presents a Nutcracker, I'm probably not even going to bother. But if they have other kinds of artists that are maybe similar to Urban Bushwomen, I might go there. I might also look to see if they have a theater or dance department. Sometimes that's like a backdoor entry to a performance. Sometimes departments will present artists and have them in residence. So that is also an approach. I go to APAP. I also go to the regional booking conferences. Wait, there's maybe one left, Arts Midwest. There used to be PAE, Performing Arts Exchange, which is no longer, but there are some other regional events. There's the NPN, National Performance Network Conference, which is really great. It's very artist driven, really great experimental dance and theater opportunities. I'm trying to think of what else. You know what I also look at? So in the dance world, we have the National Dance Project. I think you have the National Theater Project as well for theater. Looking at the list of artists who have been funded and who their partners are. Those are also like, oh, that person supports the kind of work that I do. It's also a question of not only your project, but like who gets you? Who do you think is going to get you? And where do you want to be and what kind of experience do you want to provide, and sort of making educated guesses in doing that initial outreach. Trying to think, that's probably like the basic, the bulk of what I do for prospecting. And then I make a list and I just start sort of sending out e-blasts, hopefully designed with visuals because nobody has time to read, right? Then I just kind of send out an e-blast with a personal note. It goes out en masse to everybody, but then I send out personal notes to targeted people that I want to talk to. And then make follow-up calls from there. See what I get. And as Michelle said, it could take years. It's a really tough marketplace. A lot of venues have relationships with artists that they've promised or wanted to bring them for years. So you kind of have to get in the queue. But you know, it's a great relationship to have, right? And maybe you can build on doing a masterclass. Go to campus if it's a college-based presenter. Could you go teach a class 1 year, and maybe in a couple seasons you'll be able to get your company there to cultivate relationships and audiences. I think I'm going on a while.
Whoa, that's brilliant. Thank you. I want to just call out some resources that have been offered in the chat. Several of you have mentioned APAP, which is the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. That's apap365.org. And we've also seen some suggestions in the chat for Arts Midwest and Western Arts Alliance, also regional booking conferences to be aware of. And NDP and NTP grants are run by the New England Foundation for the Arts. So those are some other resources that are happening in the chat. And if you're watching at home, I invite you to check those out as well. Was somebody going to hop in? It sounded like somebody maybe was going to add something. Michelle? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to, back up what Michelle Coe was saying. There are some presenters that really are interested in new work. So they want to hear about the project before it's real. And there are fewer and fewer of them these days, but they will sort of provide you with the residency, the extra weeks to sort of build the thing, to work with them so that they can get that like world premiere. That's important to them. And then there are other presenters who like want to see it. They want to see it premiered. They want to show up at the theater and they want to really look at it before they're going to be willing to book it. And it takes all of them. So finding your presenter who's really going to back you and sort of support that development time is the key. It's the linchpin to making everything else work, or at least it is for us in our operating model at City Company.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about the need to plan ahead. Both Preston and Michelle Coe have mentioned that sometimes the booking happens so far in advance that you need to be in the queue and you need to be building relationships over the long term. And we've also talked about you know, what are the numbers that we need to put together? So I'm going to dig in a little bit more to the numbers here and pose this question to the group, which is, what are some key budget lines that you find are really important to include, to think about, to build extra contingency for, any of those things? I just really want to think a little bit about what are those integral budget lines when you're planning for touring a production. And I'll invite any of you who want to respond to that to go ahead.
I'll just say the obvious ones. Obviously the air travel, local travel, shipping, accommodation, per diem, artist fees, and then a company fee. Those are the obvious ones, and some of them, like Michelle was saying, you have to kind of try and project, like, well, it could be, a flight to Korea, it could be $1,500, it could be $2,000 in, a year from now. But so you're trying to go off what current price is, but you want to definitely add a contingency. Yeah.
One of the things that we often ask for in terms of our US presenters is what booking agents like to say, fee plus plus. So that is, we ask for a fee plus that they pay for our local housing, plus they pay for our local transport on site. I still put in my budget the transport costs for the artist to take a cab to the airport and to take a cab home from the airport in New York, or wherever their local is. But then, if we're going to Pittsburgh or if we're going to Cincinnati, I'm asking the presenters as a starting place to say, you pay for the hotel, you pay for my local travel, which means if the hotel isn't walking distance to the theater, like, you arrange the shuttle bus every day and you work with us to set that schedule. Sometimes they can't do that and it comes back to us, and I put that into my customized budget, but that's the plus that you'll hear booking agents talk about.
For us, I think more specifically, or most importantly for us, what we learned is being really specific to who are your artists and what do they need. So something that a lot of our partners weren't quite aware of was that you're dealing with a cast of all Black actors. There needs to be a line item for hair, and hair upkeep, and barber shop visits, and getting braids done, and the time that takes. So there's that. And then I think also the support, for us, we were remounting the show like a year after it had closed, and we weren't in a position to actually store any of the items. And nothing was confirmed yet by the time that the show closed. So also making sure that your partners, that you're budgeting for any additional help that your artists are going to need, really thinking about your lighting designers, if you're going to be stopping at multiple venues, so that they have funds so they can hire an assistant to do drafting for them. With your costume designers, I think for us as well, there have been long gaps in between the presentations of the tour, right? We did 3 stops in 2019, and then we had a pandemic break, and then didn't do the show again until 2021. And so being mindful of the fact that actors' bodies are going to change, and that the costume design is going to have to, move with that. So making sure that there's money set aside so that we can be really responsive to just how we are humans and our bodies change. So I think those are 3 specific things that I learned in my experience with touring.
Yeah, budget wise, I definitely do the fee plus. Although it's really interesting because more and more now, I think after COVID and staffing shortages at venues, we're being asked to rent cars and do it ourselves, which presents its own interesting situation, because how big is your company, and then how many drivers, meaning company members who are willing to drive, how many are comfortable doing that, and if they're not, how do you kind of figure that out? So I always try to budget, add something in there for rental cars, just in case. Sometimes, and I don't put this in the fee, but I keep it in the back of my mind, an extra person for teaching, because presenters love to have the artists there and like to pile on the activities, but I think, was it Michelle? Yeah, you were talking about the exhaustion factor of the performers. So we want to keep that in mind. We want to honor, what the presenter wants to do with us as a company, but we also want to be human, right? And not pile on too much to the company members. So sometimes I just kind of have that in mind, like, well, if you want that, sixth activity, we might need to bring somebody in, and here would be the cost for that. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes they say, well, no, it's okay. Or, you have to be creative, right? How can we kind of give them what they want? Can we combine activities? Could we have one group of kids come to this other thing? Could we do an open rehearsal and just let them come in and watch us and say hi and answer a few questions and kind of connect in that way, in a way that's different, but satisfies everybody. Yeah, those are kind of and the travel is always a shock and a half now, I think, just because of flights that you budget for are just now, expensive, like we say. So having the contingency is a great idea and a must. I would also say, and this isn't part of our fee, but I've worked with artists in the past who they don't have the budget really to, if it's a run out, meaning like it's a tour stop in the middle of nothing really, like you were talking about the gaps, right? If there are a lot of gaps, are you going to be able to rehearse and have the work ready? Is the company going to be ready? So if it's 2 months in between, what kind of rehearsal time do you need? And then how do you subsidize that? If you can't sort of put some of it into the fee, and maybe some of the other folks the panelists can kind of share how they handle that. But that's always a thing too, timing and gaps and making sure everybody's comfortable and ready.
Yeah, Melissa Co, you bring up such a great point. Also, what happens when you have to do put-ins when somebody is not available? I think, for us, especially with the show like What to Send Up, which is so much about building an ensemble and us really learning that it takes more time than you think. On the page, the piece looks like it's, simple and that there's no set, but like there's so much work and so much ensemble building that has to happen to make sure that the presenters and our partners really know what it takes to get the piece, and it's so physical, to get the piece back up to where it needs to be performed. So it's such a great.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Michelle said, when City Company is touring and there's a presenter who wants a lot of master classes or Suzuki and Viewpoints training, we will often say, look, that's an additional fee and I need to send somebody else. It's really easy if it's a week-long run or it's a week-long engagement and I have 3 performances. The actors are really happy to do engagement activities on day 2 or performance 2 and 3 because we're no longer teching or rehearsing, right? But if it's one night only, it's too short for our actors to be able to tech, to put the piece back up, to get on stage, and to also do a bunch of workshops, even though they would love to. Like, they really want to be a part of the communities that we're going into. They don't like to just go to the hotel and go to the theater and go to the hotel and go to the airport. Like, they really want to engage, but if it's too super short, you just can't. We definitely start with a weekly rate for a presenter that builds in some pickup rehearsal times. And then once we actually get into the conversation of dates, we look at what are the other tours or the other engagements around it? Do we really need it? Because it's a lot easier to reduce your fee in conversation with a presenter than to add money to it. So we start by having a little bit of pickup rehearsal time built in. I also wanted to touch on a really good point that Deidra brought up around production elements and crew and what you need. One of the essential pieces of your booking conversations with presenters is your writer. So your technical writer. So being able to put into writing, what are your lighting needs? What are your costume needs? What are your scenic needs? What are your hospitality needs for that given show? What sort of personnel do you need to expect from the presenter? And what sort of personnel are you bringing? What are you shipping? Is it 5 cases, 5 road cases worth of things? Is it a suitcase? Is there no set? Are you bringing, your lighting designer and your sound designer, but you need a board op and a sound engineer there? Being able to give that to them early on, and also see what the technical specs of the theater are and have your technical team or your production manager look at that. Like, You got to make sure that y'all are on the same page on what is their space and what are your needs, and does the production even fit? Or is the space huge and your production needs a really small footprint and you're suddenly in an 1,800 seat opera house and it's gonna look wrong? Like, you want to have that conversation early. You know, it's sort of like dating, you know. And so then that allows you to sort of build into your fee the production elements that you know you're going to have to take care of. Are there consumables that you need to replace every show? Like, do you eat 10 apples on stage every show? Like, that consumable's in your budget. You know, costume cleaning is always in your budget because you always got to clean those costumes. But, you know, building new costumes may be in your budget if the piece hasn't toured for a while, or you know that it's been a wide range of time, or you may always put a little bit of costume purchase money in there just in case you have to recast somebody as a backup. That might be a place for contingency support, but in a very specific line item way.
There are a couple of great comments in the chat that I want to just bring forward. One is, for my company, we are also thinking about things like childcare stipends / reimbursement. It's another, could be really key line item. And then another one that is related to international touring that I'm not sure if, Carlo, you have had experience with this. Someone suggested adding a line for conversion rates and giving local money to artists. Is that something that you've encountered or had to think about in your process?
Well, yes, I mean, you kind of, but it's usually the conversion rate's around 3%, you know, so it's not a big factor, but yes, you want to figure it in. People need to use local money. So yeah, but it's not a huge amount.
But international touring as a US company, though, you want to think about, do you need visas? And
absolutely.
Is your presenting partner or your festival helping you manage that process or not? And what are the costs of those visas? You know, some are very inexpensive, some aren't. Some are very time consuming, some aren't.
And of course, COVID, which countries are going to let you in right now, and how, you know, do you have to quarantine? And then coming back, you're going to at present, you have to get tested to come back to the US. So, yeah.
For anyone watching this recording, it is March the, I actually don't know the date right now off the top of my head, March the 14th, 2022. So if you're watching this after this fact, this may have changed. It is Pi Day, yes. Great points though, thank you very much. Something else I heard coming up in conversation that multiple people touched on was the idea of artist need and artist care. I mean, I think it first came up, Michelle Preston used the word stress. And so at first I thought to myself, oh, the question is, how do you manage stress of the artists who are having to travel? But it's come up in so many other ways. What do the artists need? Many of you have mentioned how to be more human, how to be more flexible in that process. And so I would love to just to dig into that a little bit more. How do you think about managing the health and well-being? And I don't just mean through COVID protocols, but how do you manage the mental health and well-being of the artists who are engaging in this work, you know, away from their homes, perhaps in new places?
I think, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, this was something that was a real challenge for us while we were on tour with what to send up. I think it was one thing when we were doing it in New York, and the movement, we were, you know, our mighty team of 4 at that time, we were there, we were present, we really had, you know, control over the room we were creating, over the audiences that were coming. So then all of our actors, you know, could feel really supported as they're diving into really like letting their whole selves out of how do we deal with anti-Blackness in this society? How do we create spaces for healing, and going through that process every night? And then I think where we really had a misstep as a company was really figuring out what was it that we did when we did the show in 2018 to provide that specific care for an all-Black ensemble. What was it that we did, and how do we articulate that with our partners so that they can be really ready and prepared to provide the level of care that those artists and performers are going to need in order to go through this ritual for every single performance. And that what that care is, how they need to be taken care of, what needs to be present in the space, how everybody in the space needs to kind of show up and be, really thinking through that and having real conversations with their teams before you even arrive on site, which we learned as we went through. We're like, oh, this is what we need to really talk to them about. This is the makeup of, of what we need the wardrobe folks to be, so that they can feel most supported. This is what we need from your front of house staff. Like, this is how we need to, check in with the artists. This is how we need to make sure that we're calling time and all of that. And I think the other thing too is, where I think we also had a misstep, was being really real and transparent about how touring is hard, regardless of if it is just, a straight play, or if it is something that is, a ritual and emotionally taxing. Touring is difficult. And I think, we had a number of folks in our ensemble who hadn't been on tour yet. We had some who had, but really having that moment with the company of like, this is what to expect. Things are going to go wrong because that's life. And this is how we're here to support you. This is how we're here to catch you. And to be like, it's hard. So like, what do you need in order to like move through a tough process? So those were, I think, two of the big things we really learned.
Wonderful. Michelle Coe, were you going to say something about this topic as well?
Yeah, well, more on a sort of logistical level, I think, I know that our artistic team sort of has the company teach in teams, like the residency activities are sort of done in teams. So that way, not everybody's not working all the time. They can kind of schedule days off for people so they have time to themselves. Another aspect that we did, and we still try to do, I mean, we're going to keep doing post-COVID, was everybody, sometimes we'll try to double up in hotel rooms for the sake of the venue and the budget, but we kind of stopped that, mostly because of COVID. The board mandated that we provide single rooms for everybody, but we really feel like it's a priority because everybody needs to be able to go and decompress and have time to themselves, even if it's, at night when they go to sleep at night, or they just need to have that space. So I think that we revisited that. And that we definitely do like a company meeting. It's mostly to review the itinerary, but I think in the studio there are conversations with the company before they go out, and I think on the ground they touch base. Once everybody's there, they kind of review the itinerary and the plan and check in with everybody on a regular basis. That's a good question. That's good to think about.
I will say that no matter how long the engagement is, it actually gets harder the longer the engagement. So City Company was just out in Pittsburgh for 6 weeks. There's some years where we've partnered with the Getty Villa in LA, and they've been out there for 10 weeks. The longer they're there, the harder it is to be separated from family and to just be away from sort of regular life. A lot of our tours are 1 or 2 weeks and they come home, which is a little bit easier. But regardless of how long it is, if you have housing with a kitchen and a fridge, it makes everything easier. Like the fact that you can grocery shop and like get what you want for breakfast, as opposed to relying on a hotel, restaurant, or fast food, and making sure that they have access to store food so they can go to the grocery store and prep the lunches that they want to take to the theater. Not only is it sort of a cost savings for them, but it really allows people to stabilize like their body needs and their comfort level needs, and it just makes them feel better. So figuring out that is important. Double checking the housing that the presenter is going to put you in, like be a little sleuthy. call that hotel, see if there's any construction going on, make sure the gym is usable. All of those things like is sort of on you to do the due diligence of, because it is no fun when they get there and the housing is bad. Deidra is shaking her head. I feel like you've seen that, you've felt that. It's rough. And when they're on those long engagements, we always negotiate for apartments. That way, if you're there for 6 weeks, you're there for 10 weeks, your family can come and stay with you for a part of it. And it just sort of helps.
Great. All right. Another question that we asked you to think about in advance and has come up a little bit here. We've been talking a little bit about the sort of surrounding events, that the engagement type events, often educational type events. But I also wonder if we could talk a little bit about how do you embrace community engagement when you're touring to various destinations, and the audience that you might be engaging with, that community that you're bringing your work to, isn't your home community. How do you think about that type of community engagement when you're talking about touring? And I suspect it's probably really different for venues where you've been back multiple times or where you're staying for a long period of time versus something where you're sort of popping in and out in a faster way. And so I recognize that it's not really one size fits all, I'm sure. But if anybody would like to speak about community engagement and what that looks like for you from a touring perspective, I'd love to hear about it.
Do you mind if I go first?
Please.
One way we would, because we have puppets in many of our shows, so the immediate thing we can do right in a performance is to have a Meet the Puppets event right after a performance. And people just love that. And people will come on stage, or, you know, I mean, obviously if it's a huge audience, then we might pass the puppets out into the audience or whatever. But that's just an immediate engagement, you know, that we can do right there. And then the other thing we've learned from experience is sometimes the venues are trying to look for, thinking of having us have an event at the venue. But in general, it's much more successful if we get brought to a community group that already exists. Like it could be a school, it could be a college, something. It's if you try to bring an audience that doesn't know the company to a venue, it's very hard to attract sort of random people. But if you go to, I don't know, a girls' school that's already studying theater, or you go to that theater department, boom, you know, you've got this captive audience. And it means that you have to have whatever you're bringing be lightweight, you know, and you're not trying to bring a whole show or something. So it's often we do a shadow puppetry, which isn't necessarily part of the scene of what we performed, but it's easy to do right there as a workshop, you know. So that's it.
While we were on tour, we worked really closely with the community engagement and education departments at our host theaters. Another thing that was really built into the tour was partnering with community-based organizations. And so, you know, when we were in DC at Woolly Mammoth, our first stop was at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And then we went to Howard University. And then we went to a place called the ARC. Nope, that was... yeah, the ARC, you know, and so it was really, you know, like what Carlo was saying was about actually going and being in those communities. And then we really shared with our partners as well, just things that we do as an organization that's very much about being out in the community to tell people about our work. And so even shared resources of like, these are initiatives that we did to start spreading the word. Our cast was also always really excited when there were young people in the audiences. And so especially when we were at Duke Ellington and at Howard and at the ARC, really looking at, great, we're at your schools. Like, is there a moment in which like classes want to come, and setting up times for the cast just to chat with them, just to have some conversations. And when we came back to New York, really focusing on doing outreach with just contacts that we have to bring to bring youths, to bring young folks to the show, and letting our cast know that they were there and saying they're here. If you have capacity to meet with them, they'd love to just say hello, and doing that with members of our design team, as well as our, as well as our writer and director as well when they were on site.
I just got a text from Renee, my partner in the company, the co-director. She's like, tell them that we've gone to communities and we created work with the local people, like little shorts, and then they present that when we actually come with a performance. They do it as a preview or as a post view of the show. So so like if the theme is about grief, then they might do little pieces about grief or whatever, and puppet pieces. So yeah.
City Company was really fortunate many years ago to have been a part of an initiative through funding from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation for the Krannert Center in Champaign-Urbana in Illinois. They're connected to the University of Illinois. They received this really large community engagement grant from the Doris Duke Foundation, and we got to be a part of that. So over many years, we got to go to the Krannert Center, not with a production, but just with some of our artists, and engage with, I think they had like 4 different communities off campus that they were really sort of focusing on. And at the culmination of what I think was a 3-year process, we were presenting a production of ours there. And it was the first time that I have been on tour with the company, and I sat in a theater and I knew more people in that audience than I do in a typical New York house of ours. And so to have over that many years built enough connections of community organizers, youth, students who hadn't graduated yet, like that was really, really exciting for me. And it was in some ways the best case scenario of what community engagement can do over multiple years. And that's really the hardest thing with touring for a company of our size, is it's not like the Krannert Center or Cap UCLA or the Hopkins Center at Dartmouth can bring us every year. They're not going to plan their season that way. And so finding ways that we can build a community with, 2 or 3 years before seeing them again is something we're always thinking about.
That's amazing. We love that too. We love the deep dive. But it's hard, right? Because so many venues, their budgets are so limited. And they want to try to get as many artists in front of their audiences as possible. So we definitely propose that. I mean, ours sort of starts with a list of activities, and our artistic team has carefully sort of curated the events that we know we can handle on tour and that the company can do on tour that aren't too intensive or exhausting or anything. Because we have a whole community engagement program, and we're known for that. Urban Bush Women is definitely known for that. So that's often why, that's often like a big part of why people want to bring us. So we kind of give them the standard list and say, just look at this and see what you're interested in and come back and tell us. So then step 2 would be they come back and tell us. And then we say, well, who's the who? Who would the participants be? Who are your community partners? And really, like, who do you want to work with? It's not so much about who we would find engaging, but like, who does the presenter really want to work with in their community? And we can help them build those bridges. So we try to pose that to them, and they come back and they'll say, well, we've got these 3 partners that we're really interested in. We do try to meet with the partners to discuss the activities. It sort of depends. If it's just a master class, right, it's a lot easier. You can just sort of drop in and out. But if it's a little bit longer, or if it's a workshop they want and it's specific, with specific people and goals in mind, we do try to get on the phone with them. At least the company manager and I definitely do. And then we speak with the artistic team later about it. So it really is, we like to do multi-step planning, and I don't know how, if this is how everybody else does it, but we definitely try to set up multiple calls. So once we get there, there's some familiarity and shared mission and goals and shared understanding, which doesn't always happen, but for the most part it does. Yeah, so that's kind of our process.
Michelle, will you all go in advance if you can? Will you send one of the dancers or send Jale to do something 2-3 months in advance to build interest?
Yeah, that's ideally how we would love to do it. before or after, like even after they see the show, we could go back and they could continue the deeper dive with us. And we try to do that a lot. But then it just becomes a matter of budget and capacity. Like, oh, the dance department already has another artist coming in, or we would love to have you, but I don't have the money, you know. But that's where the BOLD program, our building, our community engagement program really comes in handy, because we could just send 1 or 2 people and that's it. So it's a lot easier on the budget. But I think that's a great part of touring too, I think, if you're able to do it.
Yeah, we've been, Renee's from Flint, Michigan, so we've been going back to Flint and working with the community people there, and then we'll bring a show over, but we've been, you know, we might be going back and forth and doing just workshops, and that builds a sort of base. And yeah.
It's always interesting to hear the presenter side of that, because some of them, I don't know, I mean, this is obvious, but yet it's always interesting to hear from that side of, sometimes they have trouble getting buy-in from those partners, or just the reality on the ground of what everyone's going through, you know, capacity or staffing shortage, or, you know, priorities. We're shifting over to student productions and we're not doing a lot with outside artists, or bless them, they're working with regional artists now, local artists, which is great, but it's like, oh, that's, you know, it's going to affect our touring. But good, I'm glad. Artists everywhere need support and need to be seen and celebrated. So anyway.
Before we move to the question and answer portion with our audience, I would like you each to offer us a thought about a moment that was particularly difficult and how you handled that moment. You've all been very transparent about what you found challenging and how you address that pretty broadly. But if you have one sort of moment that you felt like was particularly tough, and how you worked through it, I think there's a lot to be gained from that. And so if you would be comfortable sharing one of those moments, I would love for you to do that before we move to our question and answer portion.
Did I mention disasters earlier?
I do. I remember that. I remember crisis, I think was the word.
Crisis. I was not the executive director at City Company during these tours, but I was working there and sort of seeing it. You know, we had our Trojan Women. Seemed like every time we toured it, something crazy happened. So we were slated to take it to Connecticut College, which happened to be at the same time that Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast. And so suddenly we were dealt with figuring out how to get all of our sets and people to the presenter. Did they have electricity? Did they not? The same production, the cast and crew were on the train to Boston. We were working with Arts Emerson at the same time that the Boston Marathon bombing was happening. So they're pulling into Boston in the middle of chaos. And in both of those instances, I watched my predecessor, Megan Wanless. I watched how important her relationship was to the presenter in making everything okay, making sure the artists were taken care of, making sure that the presenter was able to sort of shift their schedule as necessary. You know, certainly we had multiple performances in Boston for that gig. We ended up canceling one and just bringing the community together and having a conversation. But I really watched her strong leadership in making sure that, you know, she was on the phone at all times, day and night, working with those presenters who, you know, Rob Richter at Connecticut College, God bless him, taking phone calls in his car because he didn't have electricity to make sure his battery was charged, to take care of everybody. And, you know, all of those were, you know, scary moments and moments where you're like, well, why are you still going? Why are you in the middle of it? Just bring them home. But in both of those instances, those performances of that production were really moving to those audiences. And so the relationships that you're building with your presenters just can't be underestimated in terms of their importance when things go wrong or when crises emerge.
I'm going to tell our little horror story. So we had the freight that we'd shipped the set and we had a gig in Turkey at the festival, and the ship had got delayed because of storms. So we'd actually had to cancel the first gig because it hadn't arrived yet, and it was and we had a Mid-Atlantic grant, and if we didn't do the second gig, we'd have to give all the money back. So we were building puppets in our, in our hotel room, and Renee had been having little bouts of vertigo, and we'd just gone. I think the stress was like pushing the limit, and we were visiting with the artistic director of the entire thing, and we went up 3 flights of a spiral staircase to his apartment in the top, of this building. And then Renee starts to get vertigo, and she's just completely unable. She's lying on the floor, crawling towards the balcony so that she can puke, not on the carpet, And so he had to go, of course, start the festival was starting. So we're stranded up in his apartment. And Renee's like, do not call the ambulance, do not call the ambulance. So we were working with the State Department. So I called the State Department, and they had a nurse, and she's like, talked us through it and said, it was really, so again, State Department, very helpful. But also the other lesson we learned is plan your shipping way, way in advance if you're shipping overseas. And we've never gone overseas again, never. We've always got it there by other means. If we built it there, it's like, it was easier to build stuff there because you actually have to pack everything in shipping crates anyway. And by the time you've shipped and schlepped it over to shipping supply place, I mean, you could build a set. If you just arrived 3 or 4 days earlier, we could build a set in the country, One more thing. We translated our shows into other languages. We learned that when we were in Bulgaria, we were performing with Nina, got her last name. And she could perform her show, her two-hander, in 11 different languages. And so she would be touring all over Europe and Japan and blah, blah, blah. And we thought, oh, okay, I can speak Italian and French and English. And I learned Spanish in order. So we tour in different languages, and that not only makes us available to other parts of the world, but it makes us available to audiences in the United States. So, yeah. And we started actually designing some of our shows to be like Pack Rat is all recorded sound. It's all the voice. So we can actually translate it into another language and have someone just do it in a language we don't even understand.
Wow, that's impressive. I would say, when things go, maybe I would emphasize, since we're talking about language, communication being the key, especially when it comes to community engagement events and partners working together who maybe haven't worked together before, or maybe there are other things happening beneath the surface locally that you have no idea about. I feel like the company's a pro at this point, but just being able to, things are always going to go wrong, as we've said, right? Or there'll be misunderstandings, or the person that you were talking to for months about your engagement can't make the event, but they're sending their colleague who maybe doesn't quite understand everything that's supposed to happen. I would say like our company is super great at being gracious and positive and rolling with the punches. And oops, the community center doesn't have a speaker for the dance class, like trying to, what does my friend Sarah say, who works in circus, walk on your hands, think on your feet. It's a lot of that. And being really patient and gracious in the moment, and just remembering why we're there. It's to build community and be together and celebrate togetherness and learn a few things, maybe sit in some discomfort, because that's what we do with our work. But ultimately, it's really about everybody's here and they love art, and here's how we communicate with people. So it's really about that, I think. Yeah.
I agree with that, Michelle. And there have also been times where I have gotten a call from my production crew in tech, in the theater, saying the things that we agreed to via contract aren't here. We don't feel like it's safe. The crew is, and that's when I get that's when the presenter gets the phone call that they don't want from me. Whenever the safety of our actors or our crew, or they're like, there's no way at this pace we can put the show on that we said that we are going to put on, because they don't have the crew that they said that they would have. And that's when I get on the phone and we take a look at that contract again and remember what we agreed to and decide if the show is really going to happen. Because sometimes that is the conversation. And I've never had that call end in a way where we didn't do the show. It almost always ended in a way where we got the additional support that we needed for everyone to be safe and taken care of in the theater. But sometimes you also have to be that person who makes that phone call.
And I'll just jump in and just say, like, it's helpful to organize with your company on the road who takes care of that, and at what point does it shift onto somebody else to take care of, because the people in the mix of it need to not have that conversation. So anyway, like, figuring that out ahead of time with your company is really important.
Yeah, I think, for us, there were some moments when I think trust was really broken between our artists and some of our partners, and also us, and having to really figure out how to stand in the middle of that, how to release all ego, how to create spaces so people can actually share what they are going through and create new lines of open communication, which can be really difficult as a small theater company. When we know how we like to do things and how we believe things should be done, and when other organizations aren't quite at that level yet or are still learning, and having to go and make those phone calls and have those difficult conversations and really stand in your truth is really, really tough. And it's so important to deal with those moments when that trust is broken or that confidence is broken, to deal with those in real time, especially as you're moving through a tour, because if you don't, it is going to build. As I think Michelle really said, like, the longer the tour, the more difficult it gets. And so even if you really, sit and deal with issues and figure out ways to heal and move through the process, something else can happen that's then going to set things off in another way. So really figuring out how to, release of ego, remind everybody that, like, we are here to support each other. We are here to do something that is bigger than all of us. And also, I think knowing who is your sort of partner behind the scenes to have your back when you're having those tough conversations. Because as, a company manager, executive director, managing director, when you go and you are taking in from all sides the difficult things, knowing that you've got somebody who you can call afterwards and say, like, oh my gosh, da 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 da. And they can be there to support you, and they can be there to say, what do you need me to do? Do you just need me to order you dinner? Like, do you just, so making sure that you as the producer are also figuring out how to take care of yourself in these situations as well.
Whew. Thank you for that. We have about 15 minutes left here in this space. So I want to invite those who are in the audience today to take this opportunity to ask any questions you might want to ask. And I'll just remind you that there are a couple of ways you could do this. You can drop those questions in the chat and we can read them out for you. Or you may use the raise hand feature on Zoom and we'll spotlight you and add you to the recording so that you can ask your questions live. Either one is perfectly fine. And while you're thinking about your questions, and whether you want to drop those in the chat or raise your hand, I will read out a question that has been asked and answered here in the chat. Someone asked, do you have any recommendations for shipping companies? And we had been talking about international shipping, but this person said nationally as well. And Michelle Preston responded, I love Rocket Cargo, rock-it cargo. They have always gotten my shipments where they need to be on time and safely, but they can be expensive. So sometimes we hire someone to drive along with us if the tour stops are close enough to each other. And someone else offered in the chat as well, I love ocean freight. So a couple of, and that they may be more affordable than Rocket Cargo. So a couple of suggestions there in the chat. Are there any additional questions from those of us who are here in the audience? Here's one we've got. What are your tips for successful pitching and negotiations? I've had 2 different experiences where we have a presenter interested, but once they see the fee, they say no without an opportunity for negotiation. So tips for successful pitching and negotiations.
We always say negotiable when we send them the fee, and like the whatever it is, it's like, this is a negotiable thing. We make it clear that, but yeah, that's the only tip I have in terms of.
Yeah, I usually say it's an asking fee, but I try to wait as long as possible to really make that connection and learn more about their community and what they're interested in doing. So they're a little more invested in the idea of us. Yeah. I don't know, Michelle, what is your secret?
Brutal honesty sometimes. What my secret, and Anne says this all the time, I like to ask for what I need. So I have in my mind, what do I really need? Like, have I overinflated my fee? No. Is the fee there to cover the expenses around the touring for our company? Yes. So, if I quote you a $60,000 fee and you walk away, or you counteroffer with a $10,000 fee, we're not talking about the same thing. There are very few instances where someone has countered with a much, much lower fee that we would consider taking the gig at this point in our organizational life cycle. Remember, early days, we do it for a song, right? They did a lot of things for exposure and at a loss that they wouldn't now. I like presenters who will play it straight with me. And that's really hard. Presenters don't like to say no to things. Presenters love to talk to artists. They love to be excited about the idea. And some of them really hate to say no. And I would actually prefer you say no to me if we are not in the same ballpark sooner rather than later. So I don't keep harassing you and bothering you about the same question. Which is hard. So know what you actually need, and don't inflate that too much so that you are not out of the ballpark of the people who you're talking to. Also think about, if you can, like, if it's a presenter we've been to before, I think about, what have they paid us in the past? How is that in alignment with what I need for the production that we're talking about? Is this a significantly bigger production? In which case, they need to know that going in, and I might start the conversation with, this is big. This is 10 people in it. It doesn't have 5 people. This fee is a lot bigger because of that.
And that sounds, Michelle, a little bit in line with what I'm seeing in the chat here from David. When you present your fee, do you present it alongside a budget that explains it? And it sounds like what you're saying is not necessarily the full budget, but some context. And Carlo, maybe you want to weigh in on that as well.
As a carpenter, when I'm bidding on a job, I'd figure, like, you got to lose some gigs, otherwise you're not in the right ballpark. I mean, if you're getting every job, you're asking too little.
I don't present a full budget. If really pushed, I will explain, like, how much of it is artist fees versus how much of it is production elements versus how much is travel. I will also be transparent about the places that I know I can cut. I can say, especially right now, you might imagine COVID testing is a huge budget line for me. So I will go to presenters, can you do all of the COVID testing? This is how many times a week we're going to need to test. If you can do that, I can pull that fee out of my budget and reduce it, or I can lower it. So I give that level of transparency, but I don't ever give like a whole budget over to a presenter. I need them to believe that I am good enough at my job and am trustworthy enough that the fee I'm telling you is what we really need as an organization to do this gig.
Thank you. Mariana is next. I'm going to spotlight Mariana. So perhaps, can I? Interestingly, doesn't seem like I can. There we go. Mariana, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Mariana, she, her. I am a light-skinned Puerto Rican and Mexican cis woman, and I'm in my living room in Queens, New York. Thank you all for all of this amazing discussion. I have a couple of questions, one that's a little bit related to fee, or very related to fee, actually. I'm just curious, thinking about building out a fee and hopefully not just to break even, maybe once you've gotten past the point of doing it for a song. I'm just curious, like what sort of profit margin you all sort of think of, or if you sort of operate with some standard metric that you would build into that fee to hopefully generate some income for the company. So that's my first question. And then my second question is how you all are negotiating force majeure clauses at this point. I know it's probably changed throughout the pandemic. I've had that experience at least, but I'd love to hear from you all about what, are you putting things in riders that ask for things like testing for PPE and that sort of thing? And then how are you also negotiating like actual truly like force majeure clauses and, what happens if the performance can't happen due to a COVID related either regulation or illness? So those are my two kind of things. Thanks.
We wrote, we had the board put together a COVID policy for the organization and all the company members and what practices and protocols would be officially in place on tour. We did put in a COVID related matters clause, and we updated our force majeure with the advice of our lawyer. We also put in, on the basis of a conversation that a bunch of different dance agents were having with presenters about equitable contracting, that the first payment would not be refundable, which is a bold thing to do. And I've had most presenters do not agree to it, but that was one step we felt we wanted to take. If something had to be canceled, the best that I've been able to get is that they would reimburse non-refundable travel related costs. So flights, transportation, rentals, hotel. Yeah, it's kind of an ongoing changing landscape, but it's something that we definitely try to take precautions around. I don't know if others have more details to share about that.
Yeah, we're not in that kind of place of negotiation yet at that point. We're still trying to get gigs and, yeah.
Yeah, so we work with Pentacle. Sandy Garcia over at Pentacle is our booking agent. Sandy was really working on that contract template Michelle spoke about.
Yeah.
So we've definitely revamped our force majeure clause. I definitely have a COVID safety rider. We are an actors equity company. So we cut, like, if you're going to book us, we come with a lot of rules. So our writer to start with pre-pandemic had a lot of things that maybe wouldn't be in a dance company writer or in a non-equity theater company writer. So that's certainly, it's a point of discussion. That being said, we found ourselves canceling a 6-week contract with a single venue 2 years ago now at the start of the pandemic with maybe a less sturdy force majeure clause. And I have to say that, I had a real conversation with the presenter. We canceled the contract 3 weeks early. And I said very clearly, look, this is City Company. We're an ensemble and we take care of each other. I'm paying the actors the next 3 weeks, regardless if you're paying me the rest of this fee. I really hope you're paying me the rest of this fee, but no, this is what I'm going to do with it. And they did. They honored the contract because as they said to us in that moment, we're going to look back on this time. Either we're going to be proud of how we took care of our artists and the moves that we made, or we're not. And I certainly wanted to be to feel like I was taking care of my artists in that moment, and I was able to. I also knew that I had the backing of the board to spend that money, regardless of whether that remainder of that fee came in. So I had a lot of support to be able to do that. To answer your question about percentage of fee, your standard booking agent will take 15 to 20% of the engagement fee as their commission. So I don't see any reason not to start the conversation with a 10 to 15% of the expense line covering our company's expenses. It's one of the first places that gets cut if we need to have a fee negotiation, of course, but that's where I like to start with. It doesn't always work. I don't know if people have other numbers that they'd like to use.
Yeah, I usually use like 15%, and it's, yeah. It's also like, it does get cut, and then if we have different projects that could fit budgets. So if the presenter comes back with a $10,000 offer, they're sort of course they want the full company and they'll probably say no to what I have to propose to them, but we have maybe smaller configurations, and that's again what our community engagement program does. Maybe they'll send out one performer to teach and do a performance, or but yeah, trying to continue. I just thought of that, sorry, I'm just throwing this in after the fact, but sort of a way to keep the conversation going, to explore other things that could happen. And maybe they're just like, no, I need the full company, period, for $50, and then that's it. And then there's also the conversation with the artist. I bring everything back to the artistic team, and then they say, oh, you know what, I've been wanting to go to that campus forever, so let's find a way to make this work. Or can we, sometimes one fee had a little bit of a surplus, and maybe we could roll that over to this other one that was a little bit under, so it can work out. So sometimes it's like just looking at the whole picture and seeing where you're ahead or a little behind, and seeing if it's all worth it for you in the end. I think I derailed the conversation, didn't I?
Not at all, not at all. We are unfortunately nearing the end of our time, so I'm just going to ask one final question that we got in the chat before we wrap up. And this question was directed to you, Deidra. Have you ever asked for diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator or professional to be on site, or thought about it?
So we didn't. We didn't ask for someone to be on site. I also don't think, I mean, back in like 2019, I feel like now folks are like very much about like, let's bring in lots of other consultants and stuff and folks into the room. But with our touring stops, in particular with their teams who are on the community engagement side, often had, some training, or really were focusing on, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or they were organizations who were actually sort of already part of a process to really look at that within their organization. I think also myself and other team members of mine at the movement have had some training in these areas. And so we're also very much a resource to the organizations when we made stops. And then I think, moving forward with, other pieces, I think we'll kind of see whether or not we bring in other folks.
Or, you and I can talk about this offline, or whether or not you start charging an additional fee to be the resource, right? Like we can bring this skill level to the work, but it will cost this additional amount of fee in order for us to be an additional resource beyond just a producer.
Yeah. And us really, realizing as we were on tour how much those two skill sets for us as our team are so intertwined. And so figuring out, as we were looking at other touring opportunities, oh, what's actually the sort of separation of like what we can provide as producers and then what we are providing in that sort of facilitator capacity. And knowing that, oh, we need to honor that as a separate skill set that we have, and how to have those boundaries too.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everyone. This conversation has been so fruitful. I really appreciate it. I want to thank all of our panelists, Carlo, Michelle, Deidra, and Michelle. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the audience for your participation and questions. And thanks to all of you who are viewing this recording after the fact. We hope that you have found it helpful. Art New York will be presenting additional panels like this one throughout the spring. This is the first of, I believe, 5 that are coming in the next few months on a variety of different topics, including access service providers, equitable casting practices, budget models, and more. So please check out our website to learn more about the upcoming panels. And thank you to everyone for participating today, and have a great rest of your Monday afternoon.